dietary requirements of a superstar YouTube like myself really bear covering in a personality intro like this. So here it is. Here's what a superstar of YouTube eats. Noodles.
Westfield.
The 32X killed Sega, but maybe it was the Saturn, or the Mega CD, but I'm not talking about that here. Potentially the Dreamcast. Bad management killed Sega. I've immediately gone off topic. Whatever the case, it seems Sega hated itself. Anyway, the Saturn was by far the better of the machines when compared to the Mega Drive add-on, the 32X. But on just under a handful of occasions, it turns out the little mushroom that couldn't actually kicked sand in the face of its younger, more toned, powerful and charming sibling. So I put them together in a list, wild as that may seem. I'm sure I'll say something similar to this in the entries themselves, but just to pre-iterate, the Saturn versions were technically superior. I know this. The 32X couldn't compete there, but it still outplayed the Saturn, as you'll see in this list. Ludicrous as it might seem, the Saturn's flagship fighting game actually paled in comparison to the 32X's last hurrah fighting game. And it's all thanks to time, that dastardly minx. The Saturn game had come out day and date with the console's launch. There needed to be something big that people knew that was special to tempt them in and get them hyped. But the Saturn was a clustercuss coming to market, rushed out the door, and with devs on Virtua Fighter scrambling to get it all finished, and well, it was finished, but it certainly wasn't polished. As a showpiece for the new console, Virtua Fighter was a joke. It needed tweaking and bug fixing up the wazoo. Polygons frequently glitched out, which proved annoying, but managed to be ruinous when it impacted your visual timing, or made you miss a hit when you clearly landed it because some glitch or another was messing with your mind. Virtua Fighter was meant to sell the Saturn, but instead just looked like as much of a rush job as the console's path to the shops. The fact the game was re-released on the same console, fixing things fantastically with Virtua Fighter Remix, tells you a lot. A year later, Virtua Fighter came to the then pretty much dead 32X. Nobody expected anything, and on looking at it, you'd be forgiven for sneering derisively and moving on with your life. It was cut back, fewer tasty polygons on show, less in the way of shading, lower resolution, all that stuff modern gamers bleat about as being signs of the end time and things being literally unplayable before sending their weekly death threats. But AM2 knew its way around the 32X hardware by this point, and not being rushed into getting VF32X to players, it was able to actually make the most of what it had to play with. Snappy and responsive, it played how the game was supposed to play, even if it didn't quite look the part. But it didn't have those glitches either. It was a finished version made over an extended period with care and attention. It even had widescreen mode, something the Saturn version did not. As a commenter by the name of Adam Lockington said on a YouTube video I've forgotten a number of years ago, the 32X version makes the 32X look good. The Saturn version makes the Saturn look bad. I mention it a lot, but you shouldn't underestimate how big a thing it was in the 90s for games to be arcade perfect. We'd been seeing the heavy artillery of the coin-op world recreated in the home to different degrees of goodness for over a decade by the mid-90s, but it had rarely been the perfect port that we all wanted, unless you were a millionaire and had a Neo Geo, but that's besides the point. What is the point is that the 32-bit generation was meant to be where we started getting proper arcade-perfect ports in the home, and releases like Mortal Kombat 2 should have been the perfect source for this perfection. Or flawlessness, you could say. MK2 on Saturn looked the part, with big chunky sprites doing a good job of one-upping most other contemporary home versions of the game, bar the PS1 of course. It was bright and colourful on Saturn, with all the animation, stages, characters and whatever else you could have wanted, making it look like the flawless, said it again, adaptation of Midway's arcade game. But if you listened closely, you'd hear not much.
Finish him. Fatality.
Sound effects cut, voices missing, no rumble of flawless victory, despite my many references to it in this bit of the video. And when you played MK2 on Saturn, you would be underwhelmed? Let down would be a step too far, as it worked fine, but those of us expecting a version on par with the coin-up were to be left wanting. The action was generally alright, but problems with loading times and, as with all CD media, Shang Tsung's morphing ability meant it often ended up a staccato affair. Less flow, more minor irritations, just underwhelming. While on 32X it was not overwhelming, but not underwhelming. It's a key difference. See, it was an upgraded port of the Mega Drive version, basically, but on balance MK2 32X didn't need to be much more than that when compared to the Saturn. Yes, it looked washed out comparatively, and the teeny people didn't look as arcade perfect as on the other machine, but the flow was there, the loading times hardly existed because cartridge, and importantly for a game that hedged its bets so heavily on the atmosphere side of things, it was home to all the proper sound effects and grumbled calls of flawless victory you could hope for. The silence in the Saturn version was indeed deafening. I have no idea if it's true, if it ever was true, but when people were saying of a game blow up every barrel on a level to help the frame rate, you knew you were onto a winner. So it was with Doom on the Saturn. There was absolutely no reason why the port should have run like it did, none at all. Where the PC original was a fast-paced and smooth romp through demonic hellspawn, and the PlayStation version managed to carve out its own spectacular niche for its legendary FPS, Rage Software just didn't make Doom very well on the Saturn for some reason. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered so much with Doom on Saturn made in a bubble. You could play it, you could manage a solid 10 minutes before developing a headache thanks to the choppy gloop of a frame rate. But it wasn't in a bubble. It looked like a joke compared to the PC version, a mockery of consoles next to the PS1 version, and unexpectedly, it looked like a bad port compared to the 32X version. You could throw in the Saturn's Japanese version of the game, which for some reason seemed to run a bit better and had multiplayer included, but no, Doom on Saturn wasn't very good at all. Whereas on 32X, look, I'm not that stupid. I'm never going to claim the 32X version of Doom was the best version, or that it's even up there with the best ports of one of the best games ever made, but it absolutely was better than the Saturn port, and that shouldn't be, and that's just a whole thing. Doom on 32X actually should have been better than it was, and there's a whole story behind that of id's involvement. The end result of confusion and changing priorities during development was some of the worst impressions of Doom's music ever released. The entire game playing in a dinky little window, and the fact that everybody forgot this version existed about 20 minutes after it came out because it really didn't matter or impress much in the grand scheme. But while the 32X version was a pimple on the arse of Doom ports everywhere, the Saturn version was a prolapsed anus in the world of ports. Everybody knows a pimple is preferable to a prolapse, we all learned the rhyme at school. Pimple, pimple, woo woo woo. Glad it's not a prolapse disguised as a poo. Neither Sega Doom was great, but the 32X version was definitely better than that on the Saturn. Where with Virtua Fighter I carefully ignored the remix version on Saturn, the same can't be said with Virtua Racing Deluxe on 32X, mainly because it's the only version of the game on Sega's special little fungal growth. What made it deluxe? Well, it was certainly a step up from the extra chip-powered Mega Drive version, plus it added in extra vehicles and extra tracks to bump the whole offering up. Beyond that simple content stuffing, VR Deluxe was just a fantastic port of the arcade original on the home machine. Made by Sega itself, where the Saturn version was outsourced, it maintained the true feel of the game and kept its handling and general snappiness, that's a scientific term, intact. Fast and responsive with handling that was arcadian fun, nothing like an actual F1 car, but exactly like it should be in a game you play in 10-minute bursts. Next to the arcade it looked rough, next to the Saturn it looked rough, but on playing VR Deluxe for just a brief amount of time you quickly learned this was a quality port, made with due care and attention, and would be up there with the best home versions of the game for, well, forever really. So why front load with the better version of the game? Well, because while the Saturn version was definitely poorer than its 32X sibling, it also had a much more interesting story behind its development. Sega, for whatever reason, didn't fancy porting Virtua Racing to its flagship console. Attention was more on the likes of Daytona and Virtua Fighter 2, I guess. Whatever the reason, it meant Virtua Racing ended up outsourced to Time Warner Interactive. No biggie, right? Send them all your assets and code, let them port it, an easy win for the Saturn as people snap it up to get the best port of the game wrong. See, Sega didn't want to do it like that. It didn't send Time Warner any source code or art assets. It sent some track meshes, but nothing else particularly helpful bar an arcade cabinet for the dev team to play. And play they did, essentially reverse engineering a version of Virtua Racing by playing it, recording it, watching it back, and playing it some more. As coder Chuck Tolman told Pandemonium, it wasn't a port at all. What we did was we looked at Virtua Racing and we mimicked it. Time Warner didn't even have a Saturn dev kit for the first few months it was working on the game. So, all things considered, it's a minor miracle Virtua Racing, Time Warner Interactive's VR Virtua Racing to give it its much worse name, it's a minor miracle that it was even remotely close to the original game. All that said, it wasn't great. 4 new cars and 7 new tracks there might be, making it the most content-heavy version of the game out there, but pretty much everything about it, from the loose handling making every corner a crapshoot even for me, the world's worst racing game player, through to those extras being tucked away in Grand Prix mode, unless you used a cheat code to unlock them, everything felt off. Your car's engine sounded like a bee on a moped. The inconsistent frame rate made it feel cheap when it should have been a premium Sega product. Crashing, which you did a lot, resulted in this. Graphically, it was mediocre when it should have been so much better. I would say it made no sense at all, but on hearing the story of the game's development, it actually makes perfect sense. But that still doesn't make it a good game. The full story is much longer, and you should watch the Pandemonium Virtua Racing documentary I've linked below because it's absolutely intriguing. As far as this video goes, Virtua Racing on 32X walked all over the Saturn version. And that's that for that. Onwards and forwards, probably. Thanks for watching. Bye! Oh.